Have you ever seen someone so confident in their own ignorance that they dig a hole so deep, they end up falling into it themselves? Well, wait till you hear this one. A woman in a fancy neighborhood thought she was protecting her community from a suspicious stranger. What she didn't know was that the man she tried to kick out actually owned her house. Stick around till the end because trust me, karma in this story hits hard. And hey, before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Kindness Tales Live, where true stories meet powerful lessons of respect and redemption. It was a warm Sunday morning in Oak Ridge Heights, one of those pristine suburban communities where the lawns were perfect. The mailboxes all matched, and the homeowners association acted like the neighborhood police. Karen Mitchell, the self-appointed queen of Oak Ridge, loved her role as HOA president. From barking at kids for riding bikes on the sidewalk to fining her own neighbors for improperly placed trash cans, Karen believed she was keeping the community safe, when really, she was just feeding her ego. That morning, she stood on her porch with a cup of coffee, wearing her pastel pink robe, when she noticed something that nearly made her spill her drink. Across the street, a moving truck had parked in front of Lot 42, the large white house that had been vacant for almost a year. Boxes, furniture, and bags were being unloaded by a man in his mid-30s, tall, calm, with an air of quiet confidence. His name was Marcus Reed. Marcus had recently returned from overseas after spending years working in international real estate. He had grown up not far from Oak Ridge, and buying a home here was his way of coming full circle, a gift to himself after years of hard work. What Karen didn't know was that Marcus wasn't just moving into the neighborhood. He actually owned multiple properties within it, including one she was renting. But to Karen, all she saw was what she wanted to see: a black man unloading boxes in her neighborhood. She frowned, clutching her robe tighter. "This doesn't look right," she muttered, already pulling out her phone. Within minutes, she was marching across the street, clipboard in hand, her HOA badge pinned proudly to her chest. "Excuse me, sir," she called out, voice sharp and full of authority. "This property isn't for rent. Who gave you permission to move in here?" Marcus turned, a polite smile forming. "Good morning. I'm Marcus. Karen cut him off immediately. "I don't care who you are. You need to stop unloading. This is private property. I'll have to report this to the HOA. Marcus's smile didn't fade, though there was a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." I don't think there's any misunderstanding," Karen interrupted, pulling out her phone again. "People like you don't just move into Oak Ridge Heights without approval. I know all the homeowners here." A silence fell between them, a silence thick with tension and insult. Marcus finally took a slow breath and said, "Well, then I guess you don't know everyone yet." Karen's expression hardened. "We'll see about that." She stormed off, already dialing the HOA emergency contact line, which, and unsurprisingly, routed straight to herself. As Marcus continued unloading, a few neighbors peeked out their windows. Some shook their heads, others avoided getting involved. Karen had ruled this neighborhood for years through gossip and intimidation. No one wanted to cross her. By noon, she was back, this time with a couple of HOA board members in tow. "Sir, I'm asking you one last time," she declared. "Vacate this property or we'll call the authorities." Marcus set down the box in his hands, looked at her directly, and said with calm authority, "You're welcome to call whoever you'd like. But before you do so, you might want to check the property records." Karen blinked. "What are you talking about?" Marcus reached into his pocket, pulled out a set of keys, and with a single click unlocked the front door. "Because, Ms. Mitchell," he said softly, "this isn't just my home. It's one of several I own here." The look on Karen's face froze. The color drained from her cheeks. She didn't know whether to speak, scream, or disappear. And that's when Marcus added with a faint smile, "In fact, I believe I'm also your landlord." Karen's jaw dropped. Her clipboard slipped from her hands, hitting the pavement with a loud crack. The mighty HOA queen had just learned that her authority meant nothing to the man she'd tried to evict. But little did Marcus know, this was just the beginning. Because Karen wasn't about to back down quietly. Not yet. The next morning, the entire neighborhood buzzed with gossip. Karen Mitchell's confrontation with the new man had spread faster than wildfire through Oak Ridge Heights group chat. Every message seemed to begin the same way. Did you hear what happened yesterday? But instead of embarrassment or reflection, Karen felt something else. Humiliation mixed with fury. She couldn't believe that the man she had tried to evict was not only living across the street but also owned her house. That night she had tossed and turned, replaying his calm voice in her head. In fact, I believe I'm also your landlord. The words echoed like a taunt she couldn't escape. When she woke up, she decided she wasn't going to let Marcus Reed make her look like a fool. If he thought being her landlord gave him power, she'd remind him who really ran Oak Ridge Heights, or at least who had for the past 10 years. Karen put on her pressed white blazer, her HOA badge gleaming like a medal, and marched to her office, determined to find a way to strike back. Meanwhile, Marcus was inside his new home, unpacking the last of his things. His mother's old family photo sat on the kitchen counter, right next to a mug that said, "Keep calm and close the deal." He smiled softly, shaking his head. Same old world, he murmured, thinking about how some people still saw color before character. But Marcus wasn't one to get bitter. He believed in letting actions speak louder than anger. He wanted peace, a fresh start. Still, something told him Karen wasn't done. By noon, he got his answer. A knock echoed on his door, sharp and deliberate. When Marcus opened it, Karen stood there flanked by 2 other HOA members, Linda, the timid one who always followed Karen's lead, and Tom, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Karen's smile was fake, stretched too tight. "Good afternoon, Mr. Reed," she began, her voice laced with sugar and steel. "After reviewing HOA policies, I realized there might be certain compliance issues with your property. We'll need to conduct an inspection immediately." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Compliance issues? I've barely moved in." Karen gave a condescending chuckle. "Oh, it's just standard procedure. We have to make sure everyone meets our community's expectations." Marcus could tell she was fishing for something, anything to use against him. But instead of arguing, he simply opened the door wider and said, "Be my guest." The trio stepped in, their eyes darting around like inspectors searching for a crime scene. Karen scribbled fake notes on her clipboard as she pointed out imaginary flaws. "This paint shade might not be HOA approved. Your lawn's length looks questionable. Is that a satellite dish? Those require permission." Marcus listened calmly, arms crossed, amusement flickering across his face. He knew what she was doing, intimidation disguised as procedure. When they were done, she handed him a bright pink slip. "Notice of violation," it read. "Non-compliance with HOA aesthetic standards. Fine, $500. Marcus took the paper, glanced at it once, and looked back at her. "You do realize," he said evenly, "that this fine is invalid without board consensus and signed documentation?" Karen blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" "You might want to review Section 4B of the HOA Charter," Marcus replied. "As of last month, I became the majority property holder in Oak Ridge Heights. That means every policy you enforce has to go through me now." Linda gasped. Tom's jaw dropped, but Karen just stared, frozen. "You what?" she whispered. Marcus smiled, bent, polite, controlled, but unmistakably powerful. "That's right. You work for me now, Karen, at least technically speaking." For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was thick, heavy with realization. Karen's pen trembled in her hand. "You can't just—" she began, but Marcus interrupted softly. "I can." And I did. The meeting ended with Karen storming out, face red, eyes blazing with anger. She felt the ground slipping from under her feet, her authority crumbling. For years, she'd built her identity on control, on the illusion of being in charge. Now, a man she had dismissed as unworthy had undone it all with quiet dignity and truth. That evening, as the sun set over the neat rows of identical houses, Marcus stood on his porch, sipping coffee. A few neighbors waved cautiously, hesitant but curious. For the first time, someone had stood up to Karen and won, but Marcus wasn't celebrating. He knew from experience, when people like Karen lost power, they didn't surrender. They schemed, and somewhere behind those drawn curtains across the street, Karen Mitchell was already plotting her next move, one that would drag the entire neighborhood into a storm of confrontation, prejudice, and poetic justice that no one saw coming. Days passed, but Karen Mitchell couldn't let it go. Every time she glanced out her window and saw Marcus Reed's car parked confidently in the driveway, her stomach twisted with resentment. It wasn't just that he'd outsmarted her. It was that he'd humiliated her in front of the people she'd controlled for years. Oak Ridge Heights had been her kingdom, and she'd ruled it through fear and gossip. Now, the same neighbors who once whispered her name with respect were whispering something else: laughter. She heard it when she walked her dog, when she collected her mail, even when she attended the HOA meetings. The word landlord followed her like a shadow, a cruel reminder that her new boss wasn't one of her friends from the club. It was the man she'd tried to evict. But Karen wasn't the type to surrender. She told herself, if Marcus wants to play smart, I'll play dirty. She began to dig. For hours each night, Karen sat at her computer scrolling through public records, old photos, and social media posts, hoping to find something, anything, she could use against Marcus. There has to be dirt, she muttered. No one's that clean. One night, while searching through property records, she noticed a small detail. One of Marcus's homes had been under temporary renovation for years with a pending inspection. That was all she needed. She printed out the file and smirked. Got you, she whispered. Her plan was simple. She'd call the city inspectors and claim Marcus was running illegal renovations without permits. Even if it wasn't true, an official investigation could damage his reputation and maybe even threaten his ownership rights. The next morning, she put her plan into motion. Karen called the city housing department, disguising her voice slightly. Yes, I'm calling to report a property owner who's been ignoring building codes, she said, sounding falsely concerned. You might want to look into Marcus Reed. I think he's endangering the neighborhood. The official on the other end took notes and promised to send inspectors. Karen hung up, a satisfied smile spreading across her face. Let's see how calm he is when the city's knocking on his door, she said to herself. 2 days later, a white city vehicle rolled up to Marcus's driveway. 2 inspectors stepped out with clipboards, looking puzzled but polite. Marcus greeted them with his usual calm demeanor. Good morning, gentlemen. How can I help you? One of them cleared his throat. We received a report about unpermitted construction activity connected to one of your properties. Mind if we take a look? Marcus frowned but nodded. Of course, he said, leading them to the garage where he kept files for all his real estate projects. Within minutes, he produced every permit, approval, and inspection certificate in perfect order. The inspectors flipped through the pages, impressed. You're one of the few who actually keeps this organized, one said with a laugh. Sorry for the inconvenience, sir. Seems like someone gave us a false report. Marcus smiled faintly, but inside he knew exactly who that someone was. He walked them out politely, then glanced across the street, straight at Karen's window. And sure enough, her blinds fluttered shut in a guilty rush. Marcus sighed. So this is how it's going to be, he murmured. That evening, Karen felt victorious at first until she saw Marcus standing across the street talking to 2 uniformed officers. Her stomach dropped. A few minutes later, they walked toward her house and knocked. When she opened the door, the taller officer spoke firmly. Ma'am, we received information that you may have submitted a false complaint to a city department. That's considered harassment under the new Housing Act. We just need to verify your involvement. Karen froze, her lips parting. I didn't, she stammered. The officer handed her a formal notice. You've been warned. Any further attempts to misuse legal channels could result in charges. When they left, Karen stood in her doorway, trembling with rage and embarrassment. She had always been the one calling the authorities, never the one being warned by them. And what made it worse was Marcus standing quietly by his car, watching. Not mocking, not smirking, just watching with a look of quiet disappointment. Somehow that hurt more than any insult. That night, as she sat alone in her dark living room, Karen finally admitted to herself that she'd lost control. But instead of guilt, something else began to grow inside her. Bitterness. He made me look like a liar, she whispered to her reflection. He made me the villain. She picked up her phone, her hands trembling, and began to type another message into the Oak Ridge Heights group chat. We need to discuss the safety of our community. I think Marcus Reed is not who he says he is. She hit send. Within minutes, the neighborhood chat exploded. Rumors spread faster than truth. And Marcus, who only wanted peace, would soon face the storm that Karen had just unleashed, one that would test his patience, his pride, and his belief in the goodness of people. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers, and every conversation seemed to begin with Marcus Reed's name. Karen's message had worked exactly as she planned, or at least that's what she thought. Within hours, Oak Ridge Heights residents began questioning who Marcus really was. Some claimed he was involved in shady business deals. Others said he bought the houses under fake identities. Lies stacked on lies until suspicion clouded every smiling face on the street. Karen watched it unfold with satisfaction. For the first time in weeks, she felt powerful again, sitting at her kitchen counter like a general watching her army move. But her victory was short-lived. That evening, an official email arrived in every homeowner's inbox from the Oak Ridge Heights Property Council, a body even higher than the HOA. The subject line made her heart drop. Mandatory community meeting, hosted by Mr. Marcus Reed, principal owner. She stared at it, disbelief twisting her face. "He's hosting a meeting?" she muttered. "Who does he think he is?" The answer came immediately. The man who owns half the neighborhood. By 6 p.m. the next day, the community hall was packed. Every chair was filled, every whisper echoing through the high ceilings. Karen sat near the front, arms folded, chin raised, pretending to be unfazed. But inside she was trembling. The room fell silent when Marcus walked in, calm and collected, wearing a navy suit that exuded quiet authority. He smiled, not with arrogance but warmth, and greeted people by name as he passed. It threw everyone off balance. They expected a man ready for revenge, not one radiating composure. Marcus stepped up to the podium, his voice steady but firm. "Good evening, everyone," he began. "I called this meeting because I believe truth deserves a louder voice than rumor." His eyes moved slowly across the room, pausing for just a moment on Karen. "I've heard there have been concerns about who I am, and I'd like to clear that up." He clicked a small remote, and a projector lit up behind him, displaying a series of photos. Marcus, shaking hands with city officials, cutting ribbons at real estate developments, standing with charity groups. "I'm Marcus Reed," he continued, "CEO of Reed Property Holdings. My company owns and manages housing developments across the state, including Oak Ridge Heights. This community was actually one of our earliest projects, and it's one I care deeply about." A quiet murmur spread through the crowd. "For those wondering," he added, "yes, I do own several properties here, including rental homes, one of which happens to be Ms. Karen Mitchell's residence." All eyes turned to Karen. Her cheeks flushed crimson, her lips tightening into a strained smile. Marcus continued without malice, his tone sincere. "I didn't come here to embarrass anyone. I came here to build something good, but that can't happen when we treat our neighbors with suspicion because of how they look or where they come from." His words were gentle but carried the weight of truth. "When I moved in, I hoped to be welcomed like anyone else. Instead, I was confronted, fined, and falsely reported. Not because I broke rules, but because I didn't fit someone's idea of belonging." A heavy silence filled the room. Even the people who once feared Karen now avoided looking at her. Marcus took a breath and smiled faintly. "But here's the thing about hate, and it's small. And the best way to shrink it is to stand tall with grace, not anger." He then surprised everyone by saying, "I'm not pressing charges. I'm not filing complaints. I believe people can change. In fact, I want to offer something better." He gestured to the projector again, showing plans for a new community initiative, free home improvement grants for long-term residents, including seniors and low-income families. "Let's use this neighborhood for what it was meant to be, a place where people lift each other up," he said. The room erupted into applause. People stood clapping, some even cheering. A few approached Marcus after the meeting, shaking his hand and apologizing for judging him too quickly. But Karen sat frozen, humiliated beyond words. Everything she'd built her identity on, her power, her control, her status, had crumbled in one night, not through revenge or force, but through kindness and truth. As the crowd dispersed, Marcus walked past her slowly. He paused, leaned slightly, and said softly, "I don't hold grudges, Karen, but I hope this teaches us both something." Then he walked away, leaving her sitting in stunned silence, staring at the floor that suddenly felt 1,000 miles below her feet. That night, Oak Ridge Heights changed forever. The neighbors who once feared Karen now avoided her. Some even reached out to Marcus for advice on repairs or projects. The power dynamic had shifted quietly, naturally, not by domination but by respect. And for the first time in a long time, the neighborhood felt lighter. But as for Karen, she wasn't ready to let go. Behind her polite smiles and forced apologies, anger still burned. "He made me the villain," she whispered in her empty kitchen.
"And villains don't disappear."
They wait. She didn't know it yet. But fate was about to hand her one last chance. And it would be the one moment that decided what kind of person she truly was. Weeks passed since the fateful community meeting, and Oak Ridge Heights had begun to feel different. The air was lighter, the smiles more genuine. Marcus Reed's name was now spoken with respect, even admiration. He'd earned the neighborhood's trust not through confrontation but through grace. Kids waved when he drove by. Older residents stopped to chat, and even the once timid HOA members began volunteering for his new community projects. But across the street, Karen Mitchell lived in quiet isolation. Her phone, once buzzing with HOA chatter, barely rang anymore. The woman who used to dictate lawn colors and mailbox sizes now couldn't get a single neighbor to wave back. Her pride had kept her from apologizing, but deep down, guilt had started to grow. Small, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. Every night she'd sit by her window, watching Marcus fixing things for others, helping Mrs. Green repair her porch railing, mowing the lawn of an elderly veteran, hosting weekend barbecues where laughter echoed through the cul-de-sac. Each act of kindness was a mirror she didn't want to look into, because it reflected what she'd become: bitter, lonely, and wrong. One rainy evening, Karen's doorbell rang. When she opened it, she froze. There stood Marcus, soaked but smiling, holding an umbrella over his head. "Evening, Karen," he said gently. "I noticed your porch light's been flickering for a while. Thought I'd help fix it." Karen blinked, confused. "Why would you do that? After everything I've done?" she asked quietly. Marcus shrugged. "Because kindness isn't about who deserves it, and it's about who needs it." His voice was steady, kind, and real. For the first time in her life, Karen didn't have a snappy reply. She stepped aside slowly, and Marcus got to work, replacing the old bulb and tightening the loose wires. When he finished, the light shone bright and steady against the rain. Karen stood there staring at it like it was the first time she'd seen her home truly illuminated. "Thank you," she whispered. Marcus smiled. "Any time," he said, and began to walk away. But before he reached the steps, Karen's voice trembled behind him. "Wait, Marcus?" He turned, her eyes glistened. "I'm sorry. For everything. For how I treated you, for what I said, for being me." Her words cracked mid-sentence, years of arrogance melting into something raw and human. Marcus looked at her for a long moment before replying softly, "It takes strength to say that. I forgive you." Something inside her broke, but in the best way possible. Tears she hadn't shed in years rolled down her cheeks as she nodded. "I don't know how to make things right," she admitted. Marcus gave a faint smile. "Start by doing for others what you wish someone had done for you." Then he walked back through the rain, leaving Karen standing in the glow of her fixed light, feeling something she hadn't felt in years: hope. The next morning, the neighborhood saw something no one expected. Karen Mitchell, the woman once known for HOA complaints and power trips, was out sweeping the sidewalk, not just hers, but her neighbors too. She dropped off cookies for Mrs. Green, apologized to the kids she once scolded, and even volunteered to help with Marcus's next community cleanup drive. The transformation wasn't overnight, but it was real. She stopped ruling through fear and started living through humility. And for Marcus, that was the greatest victory of all. Not that he'd proven her wrong, but that he'd helped her see right. Months later, Oak Ridge Heights held its annual neighborhood picnic. This time it wasn't run by Karen's strict rules, but by collaboration. Kids played soccer, families laughed, and a large banner read, "Better Together." As the sun began to set, Karen stood near the refreshment table, watching Marcus talk with a group of neighbors. She hesitated, then walked over holding 2 lemonades. "Truce?" she asked, offering one. Marcus chuckled. "I thought we already had one." They clinked cups and looked out at the sunset, 2 people who'd started as enemies, now simply neighbors learning to coexist. Before leaving, Karen took the microphone to make a short announcement. Her voice trembled but carried honesty. I used to think this neighborhood was perfect because everything looked perfect. But I realize now perfection means nothing without kindness, and I want to thank the man who taught me that, Marcus Reed. The crowd applauded, some even wiping tears. Marcus gave a modest nod, humbled. Karen smiled, not from pride but peace. As the night ended, the two stood side by side watching children run through sprinklers and laughter filled the air. The porch light at Karen's home still shone brightly in the distance, a silent symbol of forgiveness and change. Because in the end, power fades, pride crumbles, but kindness, that's what builds the strongest foundation.